It's a real honour to be here, especially on my home ground, but more terrifying than normal being on home ground to talk about this stuff. The point is, as Carol said, I used to do technical, statistical, methodological stuff. I was 32 years in the MRC Biostatistics unit, certainly before it was on this site, right through the formation of the Institute of Public Health, and it's a wonderful place to work with great colleagues. And I used to do formal stuff on probability in AI and expert systems, Bayesian methods in clinical trials, Bayesian computation, using bugs and whatever. So that's what I used to do until, 2007, when I could give it all up. Oh, what a relief. No more writing these damn papers and getting them sent back by referees, stupid people, rejecting my wonderful bits of wisdom. No. I got philanthropic funding from David Harding and others too. I was Winton Professor for the Public Understanding of Risk to change direction and move into communication of stats and risk. And that's what I've been working on since, and it's been a great pleasure and honour. So, I've been doing things like making TV programmes for the BBC, Climate Change by Numbers, Tales You Win, Science of Chance. BBC 4 was great at putting academics to front TV things. I've engaged in activities like jumping over the big red balls for winter wipeout. You've got to do everything if you're Professor Risk, for heaven's sake. I'm the world champion at Loop, which is a bizarre game of billiards played on an elliptical table with one pocket. It's like a putting green. Anyway, never mind. That's the sort of thing you get up to, and it's been wonderful, been really good. And now I'm really privileged to being chair of this Winton Centre for Risk and Evidence Communication. And there's the gang. The gang's constantly changing in people. But basically, this is half psychology. We've got 4 full-time psychologists now working in the maths department, communication professionals, 2 ex-BBC people, web designers and so on, working on, and I'm going to talk about some of their work later on. And I'd really like to thank all of them for their help and assistance. And that's given me a huge interest in communication and, in a way, the science of communication. I'd like to talk a bit about that. Okay, so to learn, shameless plug, to learn more, I've got a book out. Ta-da! Okay, it's very good, it's excellent, and it's even out in America with a different cover. So that's the end of plug, no more plug. No, not the end of the plug. Ha ha ha. Foils recently, #1 in non-fiction. I didn't care about the #1 in non-fiction. All I cared about was being above Robert Macfarlane. Yes, that's the one. You get really petty once you're an author. Yes. Okay, so summary. What I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the numbers do not speak for themselves. They're not cold hard facts. The way we tell the story, the changes hugely the emotional impact of those numbers, and that's science. And so we have to pay attention to the way we communicate things. It's absolutely vital. And this makes it particularly challenging to communicate risk and uncertainty, because everyone says, oh, nobody understands it, people don't understand risk, they don't like uncertainty, they don't trust uncertainty, and so on. So these are the sort of things that we are investigating. And I'm going to build, you're going to get new material. Whoa, you are honoured. Because normally I churn out the same old rubbish every time, all the time. Now you're going to get some new material because I'm going to use a very recent story to illustrate some of these ideas. And that is the story of what I might call Sausage Gate, or the killer bacon sandwich story. So in April 2019, the Sun's headline was, "Rasher of bacon a day is deadly." Whoa. Now that tells it how it is, doesn't it? Now, this was written, the article was written by Sean Wooler, who I work with and talk to on the phone. He's an excellent journalist. The article is actually rather good. The headline is awful, but of course he doesn't write the headline. First thing is to realize that the sub-editor writes the headline in order to get the clicks and the readers. It's not written by the journalist, who is excellent. But then, let's go forward now till a couple of weeks ago, and what do we see in October 2019? On the front page of The Sun, bacon's safe. Wow! And what's more, boffins have concluded that. Did you realise you're all boffins? Yeah, I know, it's frightening, isn't it? No ifs or butties. So bacon's safe, written by Sean Wooler. So what happened between April and October? What was great was discovered to make bacon safe again, having been, its lethal quantity 6 months earlier. What is going on? Now, the other headlines, that was quite an extreme headline. Other headlines on this story from a couple of weeks ago say red and processed meats are okay to eat. Controversial new guidelines claim. Don't believe it, leading experts say. Red meat row. Major review concludes cancer link is weak. Uproar after research claims red meat poses no health risk. So notice there the conflict between boffins, rival boffins, has led to the headlines. Made it a much more attractive story, given a lot more prominence. The fact that there's an argument going on, they think, oh, yippee, let's pile in. But of course, this possibly doesn't help public understanding what is going on. And we've all heard the people being interviewed saying, oh, you know, one week coffee's good for you, 1 week coffee's bad for you, what am I supposed to make of it? And I think a general, reasonable skepticism about all these studies and all these claims that the newspapers are full up. So I'd like to talk about what's going on in this specific instance and also just talk about some of the general issues about this kind of storytelling about public health. Okay. What's going on? The first thing is that this story was based on a paper on the Annals of Internal Medicine. It's freely downloadable. In fact, it wasn't just one paper, it's 5 papers with masses of supplementary material. I think hundreds of pages of material backing this story up. Done by this Nutri-Rex consortium. Now, it's important then to know, who was this? Who was this Nutri-Rex? They're not the standard people who do nutritional advice. These are people from Cochrane groups. There's Gordon Guyatt there, who we know from the development of Cochrane, from GRADE and so on, and to do with evidence-based medicine. This essentially is largely people from a rather medical background moving into nutrition. Now, what they concluded, what their recommendation for processed meat, they had this methodology for coming up with recommendations, almost an algorithmic method of reaching a recommendation. For adults 18 years of older, we suggest continuing current processed meat consumption. It goes against everything everyone was saying. We should be reducing bacon and sausages and so on. And then it's a weak recommendation, low certainty evidence. Now, that wasn't reported at all, but we'll come back to that later, what that means. Weak recommendation, low certainty evidence. They also, this was only a majority verdict. Out of the panel of 14, 3 said we should recommend that people eat less processed meat. So there's disagreement among the boffins, and this was a weak recommendation, low certainty evidence. So that's what they concluded, because that's not how it was reported. Bacon safe was how it was reported. So the response was wonderful. Punch up. These papers and conclusions represent the most egregious abuse of evidence I've ever seen, Walter Willett. These authors, I think, are wrong about absolutely everything, David Katz, who got a letter sent to the Annals of Internal Medicine trying to block publication of this lot. No wonder the journalists love this. Isn't that juicy? What a juicy fight going on. So, what is going on? I'd like to just talk about 3 questions I ask when I hear some risk story in the news, which is guaranteed is going to happen all the time. The 3 questions I ask, the first one is, why am I hearing this? It's also, I include under that, what am I not being told? So nothing to do with what's actually whether the story's true or not. I want to know the process by which I am receiving this story. Why am I hearing this story? Why has someone chosen to tell me it? Because I haven't found it, it's being presented to me. Then what does the evidence actually show? And then finally, are the claims trustworthy? Because the evidence might, we'll come to this, the evidence might say one thing, but then on top of that, and we've all seen papers whose results were quite reasonable, and then the conclusion, and there's no resemblance to what was in the results section. So are the claims true? So that's my 3 questions I ask myself, and I could break those down into different components, but I think they're an incredibly important list. Okay, so why am I hearing this? Well, to know why we're hearing it, we've got to understand something about the whole process by which news arrives on our inbox or in our newspaper or on the news. The first thing is, who is telling this? And we need to know who this team is and what their motivations might be. Now, they previously had published essentially a manifesto about them publishing their methods, saying they were going to do red meat, but they published a whole methods paper in BMC in which they said guidelines issued by several organisations, including authoritative governing bodies, suffer from major limitations in their trustworthiness, relevance and usefulness for practice. So they were setting out to disrupt the way in which nutritional guidelines have been set in the past. As a new group of people, they're going to take them on. They've got no official organisation behind them. Group of individuals got together to disrupt nutritional guidelines. So that's fun. We also need to understand about the whole process by which research gets gets to us. Not only who does it, but who gets to it. So I produced this sort of pipeline, and so the point is that people will do research. They'll decide to do scientific research, or there'll be surveys or something like that. Then it goes through this extra filter. This is the people who commissioned the work, the surveys, who decide actually what they're going to then publicize, and these are the publications. Someone's got to decide to publish it. And then we know the biases that can come in just at that first process of going from the research to the publication, let alone the fact that people don't even write it up. Nobody sees the publications, apart from a few people in this audience. No journalist ever reads the publications. They rely on the press offices or the comms department to write a press release, which then goes out to the journalists. And that will get to the journalists eventually. And then, of course, the editor sees it and may spike the story or juice it up a bit and certainly stick some fatuous headline on top of it. And then we see it. Now, I should say that social media has changed this pipeline somewhat in that it enables some direct communication by people up here to the public, which is very interesting. What's happening with avoiding the mainstream media, and we can see that being done by Colleen Rooney, for example. So the power of this method. Okay, so and this, of course, can lead to headlines like this. And I used this collection for Carol's sake. Isn't that lovely? Front pages from the Daily Express: eat curry to beat dementia, snoring raises dementia risk. These are all probably based on really good evidence, as many people will know. But you might notice a common theme among the topic of these front pages on the Daily Express. I think that says more about the readership of the Daily Express than it does about the science on dementia and Alzheimer's. So that's what we end up being fed, what a lot of the population end up getting fed. Just to illustrate this, the perils of the press release, what can happen, here's a study that was done. I hope none of the authors are in the audience, because I'm going to say it's a fairly tedious Scandinavian study. They can do their record linkages, or millions of people churn this sort of study out, and they found that we observed consistent associations between higher socioeconomic position and higher risk of glioma. Richer men got more brain tumours. Why? And the authors said that might just be an artifact. Why might it be an artifact? Come on, quick. Why might that just be an artifact? Sorry? Wait, what? Yeah, detection bias. People better off go for better healthcare, more likely to get scanned, more likely to be diagnosed. And that's what the authors said. This could be a complete artifact about the healthcare. There's also the obvious thing that richer people live longer, but I'm sure you will guess that they did an age-adjusted analysis using a Cox model. Okay, anyway, that was the abstract, sort of bit anyway, but the press office thought, oh, well, let's juice this up a bit. Let's say high levels of education linked to brain tumour risk. That's not what the paper was about, but never mind, the data was in the paper. And then, of course, you can guess what's going to happen. By the time it gets to the Daily Mirror, we get, why going to university increases the risk of getting a brain tumour. And so let that be a lesson to you all. Really, whoa, it's all that brain heating up, all that thinking that goes so badly. So we can see how this process of whispers goes through, distorting what we read. And it also chronically distorts what we see in the first place. I've got, you know this lovely joke when Groucho Marx said, I would never join any club that would have me as a member. And this paradoxical statement I use, what I call the Groucho principle. The very fact that I'm reading a health story or hearing it on the radio is reason to believe it's wrong, is reason not to listen to it. The fact it's there is reason not to listen to it, because it's newsworthy. It's gone through all these filters. Someone's decided, oh yeah, let's publish this, let's promote this story, and therefore it's almost certainly unreliable and wrong. Anyway, so I'm sorry, I'm getting a gloomy old man, but never mind. Why am I hearing this? So I'm hearing it because the group set out to disrupt the standard approach to setting guidelines. The recommendations contrasted with standard guidelines. They wouldn't have got any coverage if they'd said the same as everybody else. The fact that they accepted the papers, hundreds of pages of this, and were criticised for that. They then strongly promoted the study through press releases. The criticism between the boffins encouraged media coverage. So it's a very complex story behind the very fact that I'm hearing this on the Today programme. Okay, so what does the evidence say? The evidence is quite interesting that they did a huge systematic review and came up with exactly the same as everybody else had come up with. So nothing new in the evidence, essentially. Very roughly 50 grams of processed meat, there's a bacon sandwich, a couple of sausages a day, is associated with a 17% increased risk of bowel cancer. That's the same as WCRF have found, the same as everyone has found. It's about 18-20% increased risk of bowel cancer for 50 grams a day. So everyone's found that in every study. So the problem is that such relative risks, which is how things are generally communicated, are known to exaggerate impact. A lot of psychological studies show this is what you might call a manipulative way to frame risks. We need the absolute risks. Everyone acknowledges that. To know whether something's important or not, 19% of what? Or 17% of what is the crucial thing? Well, 17% of 6%. That's about how many, according to CRUK, will get bowel cancer during their lifetime. So 6 out of 100 people, this audience here, sadly will get bowel cancer during their lifetime. So we're talking about a 17% increase over 6 percentage points. Shall I test you? No, I'm not going to test you. I said I wasn't going to do stats and maths and the thing, but I know no journalist who can do that calculation and communicate it to his audience, in spite of the fact they know they should be doing it. We're writing an app called Real Risk that will do all this for them and do the plots and produce the language and so on. Because the crucial lesson, endlessly shown in endless experiments and in our experience as well, is that the correct way to do this risk communication, is through the idea of expected frequencies. What does it mean for 100 people? Gigerenzer has been pushing this for decades, and it works. You say, what does it mean for 100 people? Okay, here's 100 people, like you, smug, middle-class Cambridge people, eating your blueberries and granola in the morning. Yeah. So sadly, 6 out of 100 of you will get bowel cancer during your lifetime, we'd expect. Let's compare it with 100 slobs eating that every single day of their life, great big greasy bacon butty, stuffing that down their gob. That's how many will get bowel cancer, according to this data. You see, that's the 17% increase over the 6 percentage points. One case. That's 400 a year roughly. 100 people eating that every day of their lives. Every day of their lives, 400 a year. Let's say 50 years. That's what's that? Well, oh God, I can't do that. 20,000 each. 100 of them. That's 2 million. 2 million bacon sandwiches have got to be eaten to get 1 extra case of bowel cancer, according to this calculation, which is kind of putting it in perspective, to which the natural response might be, pass the brown sauce. So, BBC, bless them, used that pretty identical graphic. They didn't they grouped the icons rather than scattering the icons, but they used identical risk communication, which is really good. Well, actually, a little diversion, odd note, is that Nutriex provided absolute risks. All their stuff was based on absolute risk rather than relative risk, which is excellent. But they said there's only a 2% lifetime risk of developing colorectal cancer, which really differs from CRUK, producing far smaller estimated absolute risk reductions, which is important according to their conclusions. They got this from this Globocans source, which apparently is widely used, but it clearly uses a different methodology, and it only follows people up to 75, which for a disease of the elderly seems a bit strange. So I do think that their absolute risk estimates are far too low, which no one else seems to have picked up. Anyway, so never mind. Now, just to say, quick boast, expected frequencies are now in the UK GCSE maths syllabus. I have to say, largely due to Dominic Cummings. Awful to admit it. He was Go's advisor, and I was on a group that was advising the Department for Education on revision of the secondary maths course, and we said strongly this is how probability should be taught, and I went into the syllabus, and I think it seems to be, he mentions Gert Gigerenzer in his rambling blog, so I think it was Dom Cummings who did it. I hate, oh God, anyway, never mind. We got a book and we got a MOOC on how you should teach this way. Okay, so are the claims trustworthy? So this conclusion they came to. Now I'm going to go then on a little bit of a diversion now, away from sausages and bacon, into the idea of trust. As soon as you come up with trust, you've got to think of Honora O'Neill. Oh, she's so cool. Isn't she wonderful? Baroness Honora O'Neill. She did the Reith lectures on trust. She had a fantastic TED talk, which I really recommend. I don't usually like TED talks. This is excellent. She's a philosopher of Kant. So there's Kant and trust and jokes in 9 minutes. And her life's work in 9 minutes. Brilliant. Anyway, so makes a brilliant point. This is the slide, I think. It's one of the 2 slides are really important. She says that we boffins shouldn't try to be trusted. Everyone says, oh, we want to be trusted, we want to be trusted. She says, that's the wrong thing. Remember, she studied Kant. Kant is to do with duty. She says we should all be trying to demonstrate trustworthiness. Because trust is something that's offered up to us. We have to earn it. We have to do the work in order to be trustworthy, and then others can choose to offer up their trust to us if they wish to. It shifts the whole responsibility away from, we've got to impress the ignorant masses out there, to we have to be correct and trustworthy. It's brilliant. And it's had a huge influence. If you look at the Code of Practice, I'm a statistician, so I like this kind of thing. This is my idea of bedtime reading. The Code of Practice for Statistics, the new one, by the UK Stats Authority, the first pillar is trustworthiness. It's quality and value as well, but they put trustworthiness as the #1 objective of national statistics. Really important idea. So this runs through our work all the time, demonstrating trustworthiness. Okay, so an indicator of trustworthy communication. This is perhaps not the first one people might think of, but I think it's seeking to inform rather than persuade. Because if you're trying to persuade, it's not information, it's propaganda. You are trying to then change someone's mind, you're trying to make them do something. So that is not information, that is propaganda. So I'm drawing a big distinction here between informing or persuading. And it depends actually where I'm working. On my centre in Winton, our strapline is to inform and not persuade. But I've also been a PI on Teresa Marteau's behaviour change unit, in which you're trying to change, you're trying to persuade, you're trying to change behaviour. That's fine as well. So I'm not saying one of these is good and one of these bad. Sometimes we do want to change behaviour, but not by informing people in a misleading way. Okay, so if you want to inform, our aim is an informed health choice, rather than changing behaviour. The process, if we want to inform, is to co-produce material with patients, checking cognitive, affective and behavioural impact, to work with audiences to make sure that they understand stuff, they feel appropriately about it, and it doesn't influence their behaviour unduly in a way that's inappropriate. The process, if you want to persuade, is just to use marketing strategies for your information. Use absolute risks if you want to inform people, use relative risks, or if you're interested in talking to individuals, to say, 20,000 people get bowel cancer every year because of processed meat or red meat, that is strictly, totally irrelevant to the individual's decision. It's a public health issue, and therefore that's a way of persuading people, not informing them. You frame informing, you weigh, you do benefits and harms, give them equal weight. You don't say they're equal, you just give them equal attention. Framing there, you emphasise benefits of action, harms of inaction. Success is very difficult to measure on this one, because it's to do with whether someone felt that the decision was made appropriately. Did they feel engaged? Did they have their questions answered? Did they understand what's going on? So on. That's very difficult. Very easy for them to measure the performance indicator for this. Did people do what you want them to? So I think it's really important, I really say this to a public health audience, that we know which one we're doing on this. I'm not saying persuading is bad, although what I really follow again is Teresa Marteau and her unit, that if you want to get people to change behaviour, you don't do it by wagging your finger and giving them information, you do it by changing the choice architecture, by actually going through non-conscious means in order, if you decide that the people should, drink less, exercise more, eat better food, stop smoking, etc., then you do it through, I think you do it through regulation and choice architecture. Okay, so that's my little rant. Let's look at an example in breast screening, which is one I had to do with, which many of you may have seen before, and I apologise for that. The old style of information about breast screening was absolutely to do with persuasion. It was to persuade people, to get women to go and have a mammogram. If you haven't had a mammogram, that's a US one, but the UK ones have been very similar. That's the old style. The new style, since 2013, and I was on with many people on the group that developed this one, was based on a totally different philosophy of informed choice. It was based on consider the offer of screening, presenting the pros and cons. It doesn't recommend having screening. It reports harms and benefits in a balanced way. And this was drawn up again through this idea. If you want to do this, you have to listen to people. And so for this, there was a citizens' jury established, and there was a whole process, and I got up and said all these different ways of presenting the information, and they said which ones they liked best or thought was most appropriate. It's all, it wasn't, we weren't trying to persuade them, we just what was best for them. And they said they liked expected frequencies. Whoopee! It was such a relief, such a relief. They liked the way we wanted to do it, but we weren't allowed to suggest that. And so this is a page from the leaflet, which obviously many of you will have seen. Out of 100 women having breast screening, 96 will get a normal result, 4 will get a recall, but it doesn't mean you've got cancer. The minority of people who get a recall have actually got cancer. These are false positive recalls, and that's fine, and everything. And nothing, no mention of sensitivity and specificity and all this nonsense, which means nothing to people and is grossly misleading because it makes people think that the test is 90% accurate. Therefore, if I get a recall, there's 90% chance I've got cancer, which is nonsense. Okay, so the other side, of course, is to do with the whole problem. The downside of screening is overdiagnosis and overtreatment. We know that. And this leaflet for the first time actually faces up to that you could scathe your life from breast cancer, but it could mean that you're diagnosed and treated for a cancer that would never have become life-threatening. And that image is in the leaflet. The whole dilemma of overdiagnosis and against early diagnosis is there, very clearly described. And this data is in the leaflet. 200 women going for screening, between 50 and 70, 15 will develop breast cancer, 12 treated survive, 80% survive, or 80% don't die of breast cancer, 3 sadly will die of breast cancer. If you compare with that with what we'd expect for 200 women not going for screening, so this is classic bacon sandwich, representation, but as a tree, 15 will develop breast cancer, 8 treated and survive, 4 die from breast cancer. That's 1 extra death from breast cancer. However, 3 of these women will never know they've got breast cancer. They won't have, their cancer will not be clinically obvious. They will not be breast cancer sufferers. They may get something else, but then whatever. But they will be, it means that there'll be 3 people in this group treated unnecessarily. So that's 4,000 people treated unnecessarily for their breast cancer every year in this country, and 1,300 quotes lives saved or early deaths prevented from breast cancer. That's the harms and the benefits of the screening program. Those population numbers are irrelevant to the woman's individual decision. This is relevant. Unfortunately, the picture is not, anyone who sees the leaflet, the picture is not in the leaflet. The numbers are in the leaflet, the picture isn't. It got taken out. Fury from some members of the committee. But it's too complicated, people don't understand it, so that's a shame, and I think that anyone can be taught to read these diagrams. Anyway, so there you go. General issues in my quick summary now, everything I've learned on risk communication. There's no correct way of doing it. It was like, how should we do it? We get people come, how should we communicate with it? Don't know. Which is, so it's great. I've worked for this in decades of work, and I've finally decided I don't know. There's no correct way, because you have to know what you're trying to do. You've got to decide the audiences. What is the objective, which we would hope is informing and not persuading, and then you've got to test if those objectives have been met. So good communication is one that achieves the objectives you have set yourself. Full stop. But there are some skills that have people generally acknowledged, apart from using expected frequencies and things like that, that led communication. You can have something at a high level and then a deeper level if people want to go deeper. You also have multiple representations. One size doesn't fit all. We're all hugely different in our capacity to understand numbers and pictures and words and stories and so on, stuff like that. Crucially, it's relevant info at the right time in the right form. So there's no correct answer. You have to test it. And I'd like to now just talk about some work we've been doing with Cambridge Institute of Public Health, essentially Paul Ferro and his team on the Predict breast cancer system, which you may have all seen. And I'm just going to, this has been in existence for quite a long time, but our team has put the front end on it with a lot of user testing. Psychologists have done interviews with doctors and the patients and health professionals and so on. So this was developed by Paul Ferro over the road, Gordon Wishart. It's an algorithm providing personalised survival estimates after surgery for breast cancer at 15 years. Competing risk Cox regression analysis with using, I said there'd be some stats. Competing risk Cox regression analysis with using fractional polynomials to smooth the cumulative hazards. Is that right? Okay, cool. I knew it to do that, but we built a new interface with it. We thought we might have to have 2 interfaces, one for patients, one for doctors. No, use one, that's fine. And extensive iterative testing of interface. This idea of user-centered testing that you develop, little testing, you get feedback, you revise, feedback, revise, feedback, revise. It never stops, never stops. You may have all seen this before, but I'd like to just give a quick demo of this, because if this works, just to show that some of the features of it. Let me see if I can do that. Let me blow that. Let me try to blow that up. I've put a woman in here. So I put a DTC 67 with a 2 centimetre tumour grade 2, etc. And it immediately comes up with what the doctors in the MDTs, the multidisciplinary team meeting, said they wanted just a table. They said, so we could set that at 10, let's say 10 years, we could do 15 years, but let's do 10 years. So 62% of women like this would expect to be alive at 10 years. If they had hormone therapy, go to 68%, chemotherapy to 74%, trastuzumab, that's Herceptin, up to 77%, bisphosphonates to 78%. So there's a couple of things noted in this table. The other thing, if death from breast cancer were excluded, 85% would survive at least 10 years. So this is the novelty, is to actually put in, if we could cure this woman, if we could guarantee she was not going to die of breast cancer, people don't live forever. So that's as high as we can expect to get. That's the sort of ceiling of what we could be aiming for in terms of the survival. The other thing is we could give uncertainty around those ranges if we wanted to. But the crucial thing is that this is just a table, but we want to be able to use other formats. We can do survival curves like that. And the nice thing about the survival curves is that we can then change, well, what if this tumour were smaller, and what if it were larger? We can immediately, on all these plots, we can look at the influence in a nice interactive way, a what-if way, of each item of information in terms of the proportion we'd expect to survive out to 15 years. What we can see from this very nicely, the dashed line is as good as we could ever expect to get, and how these different therapies, which you may or not want, how far they take you to that, in a sense. We don't call it cure. We spent ages trying to think of what wording to use this for excluding breast cancer. We didn't say for those who are cured to say, because we didn't never say anyone's cured, and so on. Okay, we can give a chart. Cumulative bar chart, stacked bar charts. Now, these are deeply misunderstood by people. I don't like, you never see a pie chart in anything that comes out from us. They're so ghastly. But even stacked bar charts can be very difficult to read. So we're thinking of moving away from the stacked bar chart. We can do it in text. What does it mean for 100 women? And icon arrays. Now, these, this is a standard bacon sandwich idea, except we tried little people, and that did not go down well with patients. Little women. And the other thing that didn't go down well was having the deaths from other causes to be black, filled in black people. That was really bad, because this is just sort of presenting people with their mortality. And when we go to 15 years, of course, that grows and grows, because by then this woman will be 82. And so many people would have died, 28, we'd expect to have died from other causes anyway. So again, we can then look at the sensitivity of that, how it changes as different features, if you were younger, how these would change. Okay, so that's how that works, and this has been very successful. Let's go back to that. Yeah, more than 30,000 users a month and more than 1 million so far. And I can whip through those slides now because I don't have to get to that. Okay, that's what we were at. Okay, cool. So that's pretty good, I think. The other thing we should mention, so that's the icon array. Okay, back to Honora Neal, because this is an algorithm. It's not AI really, but it's an algorithm, and we need to be very attentive to the sort of discussion that's going on about algorithms now. And that's to do with the trustworthiness of algorithms. And Honora Neal's written about this. She says we've got intelligent openness about information. If we're going to give information, we have to think about what that transparency, trustworthiness means. And these are the 4 things. This is the most important slide in the whole talk. She says that intelligent information, it's got to be accessible. People have got to be able to find it. It's got to be intelligible. You've got to be able to understand it, and you need to check that. It's got to be usable. It's got to actually answer their questions and concerns. So you've got to know what those questions and concerns are. And it's got to be accessible. You've got to be able to check and explain it if necessary. And that's the crucial thing. So you'd have to provide explanation. we provide multiple layers of explanation in Predict, right down to providing the code if you actually want it. And nobody seems to, but that's the way it goes. And we provide multiple. And there's the maths, which I had to write the maths out. That's all there. Again, nobody ever looks at it, but never mind. It's there. I've done my duty in the Kantian sense. Okay, so what have I? Oh, the microphone's on the jacket. Sorry. Let me move the microphone. Never done that. Okay, here we go. Cool. Is that all right? Good. Okay, so, and now, because Paul and his team, with David Thurtle and Vincent Nanaprogosam, has done one for prostate, and so we got Prostate Predict as well, which is great. And the nice thing about Prostate Predict is that we put the side effects in. Haven't done that for breast cancer yet, because the data wasn't available. But for example, so we got incontinence, erectile dysfunction, and bowel problems in terms of little icon arrays, little stacked little bars showing how many you'd expect to have these problems after 3 years. Okay, so it allows people to weigh up the benefits and harms of treatment. Okay, meanwhile, back at processed meat, bacon wrapped around a sausage. Phew. That's what you need. So what they concluded, remember they said weak recommendation, low certainty evidence. Now, what does a weak recommendation mean? It recognises that the different choices will be appropriate for different patients and that you must help each patient arrive at a management decision consistent with her values and preferences. So they're in this what's called a preference zone. So it's not so it's where individual values and preferences could shift the recommendation one way or another. You're in this intermediate, what's called the preference zone. It's not clear that this is universally good or universally bad. And this did not get covered at all. This did not get covered. It was just portrayed as bacon is okay, everyone can continue what they're eating, which is very inappropriate. The point being that they also reviewed attitudes to eating meat. And a crucial part of their view on it, remember they come from a clinical background, much stronger clinical background, is that patients' values and preferences should come into the recommendation that are being given. So the other thing is the low certainty was based on the grade scale. So a quick diversion onto, neither were properly communicated. No one took any notice of these at all. Okay, so how are such different conclusions reached based on essentially the same evidence? So the evidence is the same, but these groups come up with, public health groups come up with totally different recommendations. How did that happen? Well, the Nucci-Rex team essentially took an individual perspective. They said those absolute risk reductions are uncertain and small from an individual perspective and may, not definitely, be cancelled out by the enjoyment of eating meat and the bother of changing habits. So that was a very individual perspective. However, the others, who are the critical group, public health groups, said these small benefits can be important from a public health population word perspective. Because I don't need any to tell this audience how much you can come up with different views, whether you take a Jeffrey Rose idea of moving everybody by a small amount and that having the biggest public health effect, to the fact that most people, this won't benefit most people to any extent that they would notice. So my conclusion is it can be perfectly reasonable for guidance to be given by authorities and also be perfectly reasonable for individuals to ignore it. Both can be right. There's no right or wrong here. Okay, so what about the grade ratings? Quick little diversion onto grade. Grade is used, many of you will know grade. Who knows about grade? Hey, quite a few. Okay, not everybody. Grade is used as a way to assess the quality of evidence, what they call the certainty of evidence underlying claims. So, for example, if you go to the BMJ, the MAGIC team doing benefits and harms of medical treatments, here's the thing of whether you want an open or a catheter-based solution for a heart problem. For older people, they say the non-invasive one is very strong evidence, strong recommendation in favour of that, based on expected frequencies of events among 1,000 people, deaths and so on. But this evidence is also given a quality rating, the quality of evidence. 3-star, 3-star, 4-star, 4-star, 4-star. But aortic valve re-interventions gets 1 star, very low evidence. So this is, although it's a really big effect, they're saying, actually, this evidence isn't very good at all. So this is very important. And what I want to say is that team again, sorry, got a little blob here. try and get rid of Twitter. Okay, so that's what grade does, and there's a whole algorithm for setting these ratings based on whether it was based on a randomized study and so on. We've written a paper on all this business about communicating uncertainty of facts, numbers, and science, which I recommend, and it talks about I think a rather important distinction between the level of what we call the level of uncertainty, whereas we got direct uncertainty, which is when you just make a confidence interval or a probability or something like that. It's actually a direct measure of uncertainty about the fact or the number. But an indirect one doesn't say it. It just says, well, I'm not going to say what this means about the number. I'm just going to say the evidence isn't very good. The data isn't very good. I don't really understand what's going on. So it's a very indirect statement. It's not saying what that number might be. It's not translated to an interval. It's just saying it's not based on very good evidence. And the need for both levels has been found, rediscovered by group after group after group after group, that you cannot put everything into a confidence interval. So this is to do with communicating confidence in the science, strength of evidence. IPCC and climate change do it. They'll produce probabilities and estimates and confidence intervals, but they will also say about how confident they are in the science, based on whether there's agreement between the experts, the boffins, and whether the evidence is robust. And they'll only give actual numerical conclusions for when they're confident in the science. What Work Centres do this? So, for example, in education, the What Work Centre reviews different possible interventions in the classroom, and they rank them. This is like TripAdvisor. So think of these like hotels. So some of these are more expensive. Here's one, aspiration interventions. This is going into a class and, hey, come on, you can be success, you can be a success. Well, that's expensive. This is how the effect you might get, expected effect, which is 0. So it doesn't seem to work. And this is how good the evidence is, and the evidence is crummy anyway. So let's not do that one. But what about this one? This is cheap, collaborative learning, cheap. Good evidence that it might put 5 months on educational progress. So this is not grade, but it's a similar scale. It's a star rating for the quality of the underlying evidence. Very powerful idea. I really like it. Useful means of communication. However, grade was developed for randomized trials of individual level interventions, for clinical interventions. It's been moved over to nutritional advice, behavioral advice, and that has been strongly criticized. And I'm not going to say anything about whether it is appropriate, but I think it could be questioned about that. Okay, are the claims trustworthy? So my final conclusion is that the claims were trustworthy given the approach that the Nutri-Rex, given the structure they'd set up. So given their manifesto, they said what they were doing and they did it. However, it was appallingly communicated both by them and by the paper and the press release. So none of this got this individual, the fact that they were actually saying this is up to individuals, some people they might want to reduce, and so on, wasn't reflected at all in either the press release or the coverage. Very poor indeed. Not made clear that a weak recommendation meant that these are individualized, you're in the preference zone. Okay, what would I say to someone? Well, if anyone was stupid enough to ask me for my advice, I mean, who am I to do this? But what would I say if you came up to me and said, should I be, stuffing myself with steak and bacon? What are we having for dinner tonight? Anyway, I've forgotten. I'd say there's some evidence of small increases in risk, which I think there is. No good evidence the meat will cause serious harm to you. But if you want to be on the safe side, then cut it down. And that will help the planet, which I think is the biggest reason to cutting down meat eating. So it is the environmental gains. The crucial thing is that in those situations of uncertainty, a precautionary approach might be more reasonable. So I think that it was a complete mess up, this boffin conflict, which does nothing for the reputation of public health, was as much as anything to do with bad communication. Okay, so just to finish off, trustworthy communication. Informing and not persuading. Intelligent openness. Blah, blah, blah. Confident about uncertainty. I haven't gone into it, but we're doing a lot of research showing that if you can be confident about your uncertainty, particularly if you can put a range on something, no loss in trust from the audience. It's fine. They're very happy to accept that. And some people would even say it increases trust. Respect audiences. Don't be rude, but don't treat the public like they're idiots. Respect the audiences. Test outputs. Multiple layered formats. I think this is a good idea. Whether the grade system is the right one is another matter, but I think it's a really good idea. You've got to preempt misunderstandings, fake news. And I've just learned that you have to work with people who know about storytelling, about imagery, about design, and the communication professionals. Communication is such an essential thing. I think people working in statistics and public health, integral part of their training should be in communication. Okay, have I got, oh, can I tell a few jokes? Can I just do one more thing? One more story. Okay, no, I'll tell you, no, it's about drinking.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you that.
Oh, can I do drinking? Oh, no, okay, I'll stop then, and you can